The tea had gone cold again. I hadn't touched it since morning. The cup sat on my oak desk, chipped on one side, still stained with bergamot. My fingers hovered above it, then moved instead toward the leather-bound journal beside it. Page 217. Yesterday's entry. 3 phone calls from Elliot, all at odd hours. Each one began the same way. "Mom, are you sure you're remembering things correctly?" His voice used to sound concerned. Now it sounded rehearsed. Like a script he'd read too many times. I had written everything down. Time, tone, words. He said I'd forgotten our lunch last Thursday. But I hadn't. The page said, "Lunch cancelled. Elliot rescheduled. Said Cora had a conference." The ink was still fresh. The date circled twice. I could still smell the faint iron of the pen stroke. Still hear the scratch it made on paper. Still feel the weight of remembering. They say memory fades with age. Mine didn't fade. It sharpened. Focused like a lens on the moments they wished I'd miss. I looked at the framed photo on the shelf, me, Elliot, and his father. Taken in front of the library the day I retired. The glass was dusty now. Elliot's face looked different back then. Softer. That boy had once memorized every line of Shel Silverstein. Now he doubts if I can remember my own words. The clock on the wall stopped ticking last week. I hadn't fixed it. It felt fitting. The house was quiet. Only the wind outside. Only the breath in my chest. Only the thought repeating itself in the stillness. If they can convince you that you're forgetting, they can rewrite everything you once knew. When your mind is all you have left to protect, who will believe you remembered it right? The mornings on this hill had their own rhythm. I didn't set an alarm. The light knew when to come in. Filtered through pine trees, it settled on the kitchen counter, soft, golden, familiar. I reached for my cardigan, still draped on the same chair. Its wool smelled faintly of cedar and something older. Something like memory. That morning, I made toast. 2 slices, as always. One with apricot jam. One plain. The butter had softened overnight, the way I liked it, yielding, but still cool at the center. The kettle sang low, not sharp, as if whispering. I poured Earl Grey into my favorite cup. The one Elliot bought me when he was 13. A bookstore mug with Sylvia Plath's lines etched in blue. Let me live, love, and say it well in good sentences. There was a chip on the rim. I never threw it out. Some things are meant to bear marks. I sat by the window, wrapped in the cardigan. The wind carried the scent of wet pine needles. The rocking chair beneath me creaked once. Then silence. I liked that sound. It reminded me I was still here. Still grounded. Still holding something of myself. My eyes scanned yesterday's journal entry again. 3 calls. 3 questions about whether I'd forgotten something. I hadn't. The lines I wrote were even and deliberate. Nothing smudged. Nothing crossed out. My pen, the same Mont Blanc Robert gave me for our last anniversary, glided smoothly. I ran my fingers over the page, feeling the grooves the ink had left. As if the paper remembered, too. Once, I would have brushed it off. Told myself he was tired, or just being careful. But lately, the tone had changed. So had the pauses. Are you sleeping okay, Mom? Have you had any trouble with the stove? Do you remember where you keep the insurance papers? Each one arrived wrapped in concern. But beneath that, a blueprint. A rehearsed pattern. A way to plant doubt without sounding cruel. I looked toward the fridge. There it was. The old photo of us at Lake Junaluska. He'd insisted on steering the canoe. We spun in circles, but I let him think he let us in. He was beaming. Sunburned. That photo was fading now. Edges curled. But it still smiled. Still remembered. Still proof of a time before he thought I needed protecting from myself. The phone rang. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said, warm but practiced. Then, I was thinking, maybe you could write down little things, just to be safe. Safe for whom? I looked down at the page. Already filled. Not just events. But tones, pauses, choices. If memory was at stake, I had already started protecting it. After the call ended, I didn't move for a while. The air inside the house felt still, like it was listening. Outside, wind rustled through the pines, brushing against the windows like an old friend unsure of their welcome. I closed the journal gently. Not slammed. Not hidden. Just closed. As if it needed rest, too. I stood and walked past the bookshelf, my fingers brushing the spines out of habit. Steinbeck. Wolf. Plath. Each name whispered something I once believed in. That words mattered. That memory was sacred. That the mind was a home no one could trespass. I boiled water again. Not for tea. Just to hear the sound. The whistle rose slowly, trembled, then fell silent when I turned off the heat. Some days, I boiled water 3 times without drinking it. Not because I forgot, but because I needed a ritual. A sign that time was still mine. Elliot had started calling every other day now. Short conversations, always laced with the same concern. Just checking in. But he never asked what I was reading. Never mentioned the poem I mailed to the girls last month. Never said thank you for the birthday package I sent complete with hand-knit scarves in their favorite colors. No photos of them wearing them. No. They loved it, Mom. Only. Cora's been busy. So was I, once. Busy teaching 30 kids to treat books like living things. Busy staying up late with Robert, reading aloud by lamplight. Busy making a home of words and warmth and paper and patience. I wasn't busy now. But I wasn't empty either. In the evenings, I sat on the porch with a blanket across my lap. The same one Robert used to steal during winter movie nights. Its fringe was unraveling. But I kept it. I kept a lot of things. Even the things others thought I should let go of. A letter Robert wrote in '88, with a pressed fern tucked inside. The receipt from our last diner breakfast. The tiny paper stars Elliot folded in 3rd grade. They didn't sparkle anymore. But they were real. And they remembered. That's the difference between clutter and legacy. Only the owner can tell. I stared out at the hills until they blurred. Not from age. Not from confusion. Just from stillness. It had been days since anyone visited. Alice had called last week. We talked about the local elections. Then about tomatoes. It felt nice. Ordinary. No one asking about my pills. Or my memory. Or my mind. Just tomatoes. I missed that kind of conversation. The mail came late that afternoon. I wasn't expecting anything. Mostly circulars and coupons for things I didn't need: dish soap, lawn chairs, meal kits. But tucked between them was a cream-colored envelope. No return address. Just my name, written in Elliot's handwriting. Claudia Mercer. No. Mom. Just that. I brought it inside and opened it at the kitchen counter. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. Typed. Neat. Legal. One was a brochure about long-term cognitive care planning. Another was a printout of a medical directive template. And the last a note. Short. Polite. Detached. Just wanted you to have these, in case you ever feel unsure. Love, Elliot. I stood there for a long time, holding the papers. They didn't shake in my hand. Not because I wasn't shaken. But because I'd been expecting this. Maybe not today. Not in an envelope. But it had been coming. In the pauses. In the gentle nudges. In the way he said, just in case, more than, how are you, really? The tea kettle began to hum again. I had turned it on without noticing. I set the envelope down beside the stove and turned off the burner. The flame disappeared with a soft sigh. That night, I walked down to the small study at the back of the house. I hadn't used it much since Robert passed. The old lamp still worked. The books had gathered dust. But the desk was clear. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick, cloth-covered binder. Inside, birth certificates, house deeds, pension statements, marriage license. Proof of a life remembered properly. Arranged in order. Labeled. All still in my handwriting. Mine. I ran my hand across the pages, like one might smooth the fur of an old cat. Slow, careful, reverent. I'd kept this binder up to date for years. Not because anyone asked, but because I knew one day, someone would. And when that day came, I wanted to be ready. I turned off the lamp, left the binder open, just in case. The next morning, I found the brochure from Elliot placed back on the counter. It had been moved. Not by me. Maybe by the breeze through the cracked window. Maybe. I closed the window gently, secured the latch, then smoothed the paper flat with my palm. The title stared back at me like an accusation wrapped in care. Planning for when you can't decide for yourself. I traced the words with one finger, then folded it in half. Then again. And again. Until it couldn't say anything at all. I placed it in the wastebasket. Covered it with yesterday's paper. Then sat down to write in my journal. A new entry. A new line. But the same thought. If they start planning for your silence, how long before they stop listening to your voice? The next Sunday, I walked down to the postbox at the end of the drive. It was warm for late spring. The kind of afternoon that used to bring Elliot and Robert out to rake leaves or clean gutters. Now it was just me, watching the dust gather. There were 2 envelopes in the box. One was a coupon booklet. The other a flyer for a community memory wellness workshop. Held at the Civic Center downtown. No return name, but I knew the kind of ink Elliot used in his home printer. I turned the flyer over. He hadn't signed it. Just circled a line in orange highlighter. A safe and supportive space to talk about early signs of cognitive decline. No note. No greeting. Just the circle. Just the hint. I brought it inside and laid it on the table. Didn't tear it. Didn't hide it. Just let it sit there like a question with no punctuation. Later that afternoon, I walked into the guest room, the one they used to stay in when visiting. The bed had been made, as always. Crisp corners. Lavender sachet under the pillow. But something was missing. The photo on the nightstand. It used to be a picture of Elliot, maybe 8 years old, curled up beside Robert on the couch. It had been replaced. Now, a framed print of some mountain landscape. Generic. No faces. No memory. Just pleasant nothing. I found the old photo tucked into the drawer below. No frame. Just placed between 2 coasters. When I asked Elliot about it on the phone, his answer came smooth. Too smooth. Oh, I think Cora moved it while dusting. She thought a landscape might be more calming for the girls. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Words like calming were always the ones that cut deepest. Because they came dressed in concern. Like soft fabric lined with thorns. That night, I sat on the porch again. Wrapped in Robert's old cardigan. The one that smelled faintly of tobacco and lemongrass soap. I watched the wind play with the corner of the flyer still left on the table. It fluttered once. Then stilled. Like it knew it had said enough. I thought of calling Alice. But I didn't want to explain. Not yet. Instead, I opened my journal. Wrote down the date. The flyer. The photo. The new frame. The old drawer. The word calming. And under it all, in small, clear print, they're rearranging me. Piece by piece. A few days later, I received a group email. Subject line, summer visit planning. It was from Cora. She'd included Elliot, both girls, and even her sister in Oregon. I was in the BCC field. No greeting. No direct line to me. Just the outline of a 2-week trip to a lake house rental in Georgia. Dates, menus, room assignments. The girls would share the loft. Cora's sister and her boys would take the downstairs. Elliot and Cora. The master bedroom. No mention of me. No. Mom will take the front room. No. Let's make sure Grandma has what she needs. Just bullet points and logistics. I scrolled to the end of the email. There was a line almost an afterthought. If Claudia wants to join, we'll need to bring an extra cot. Maybe fold out? Not Mom. Not her room. Just a cot. I read it twice. The word glared back at me like a mistake in a poem. I didn't respond. Didn't forward. Didn't ask questions. I printed the email and placed it into the back of my journal. Filed under, language that shifts the ground beneath you. That weekend, I dropped off a book at the local library, the same building where I'd shelved books for 23 years. The new librarian was kind. She smiled at me like someone recognizing a story long removed from the catalog. As I turned to leave, I passed the community bulletin board. Pinned in the center was a flyer for legacy letters, writing what matters before it's forgotten. I didn't take one. But I stood there for a while. Reading. Breathing. Remembering. That night, I opened the box under my bed. Inside, old family holiday cards. Dozens. Some yellowed, some still bright. I sorted through them slowly, like touching the pages of a lost language. 2014. Merry Christmas from all of us, Elliot, Cora, Eloise, Maddie, and Mom. 2017. Warm wishes. The Mercers. My name had moved. From second to last. Then. 2020. Happy holidays from the Mercer family. No names. No titles. No mention. Just a snowy house illustration and a return address in Atlanta. I stared at it a long time. Then placed it face down. Not torn. Not thrown away. Just turned. Like a chapter I didn't remember agreeing to end. I closed the box gently. Returned it to its spot. The mattress creaked above it. I stood there in the dark, hands still resting on the frame. And asked myself, if they no longer say your name, how long before you forget the sound of it, too? The envelope looked like all the others. White. Windowed. Clean. But my name was printed slightly off-center, just enough to unsettle. I held it up to the light. Bank name in the corner. Nothing unusual. Inside, a monthly statement. I unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases with both hands. Line by line, my eyes followed the figures. But one stood out. A new account. Linked. My name listed only as secondary. And below that, Elliot Mercer, primary. I stared at the words as if they might rearrange themselves. They didn't. I flipped the page. There it was again, his name at the top, mine beneath, in smaller print. I sat back in the chair. The kitchen clock ticked twice. Then hesitated. I picked up the phone. Called the bank. Pressed 4 for accounts. Then 2. Then waited. The voice on the line was polite. Efficient. I see the link was initiated last month, she said. Through our online portal. I hadn't logged in over a year. I still wrote checks by hand. Still used the little blue ledger with the tier in its corner. Is this a joint account now? I asked, my voice steady. Yes, ma'am, she replied. With dual access. I paused. But I didn't authorize it. A silence. Then, I'm afraid the digital consent was verified. It shows as completed. What kind of consent? Electronic signature. Standard e-documents. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then thanked her and hung up. The dial tone lingered longer than usual. Almost like it didn't want to let go. I stood, opened the drawer beneath the phone. Took out my file folder, important papers. Everything's still there. Birth certificate. Deed to the house. Power of attorney form and signed, untouched. I pulled it out. Held it under the kitchen light. The page was blank, except for my name at the top and Elliot's typed neatly below. It had been printed. But never filled in. Never signed. Never agreed upon. I pressed the edge between my fingers. Felt the grain of the paper. Not rough. Not worn. Still new. I opened my journal to the back. Wrote down the date. The account number. The name order. The words, digital consent. Then underlined them. Twice. Afterward, I sat very still at the kitchen table. The same table where I once taught Elliot how to balance a checkbook. He'd been 12. His brow furrowed. His hands ink-stained. He asked what overdraft meant. I told him. Overdraft is when you take more than what you've earned. He'd nodded slowly. Understood immediately. Apparently, he remembered that lesson well. A week later, another envelope arrived. This one thicker. No logo, this time, just my address printed plainly, almost like it didn't want to be noticed. Inside, a bundle of documents. Stapled. Sorted. Each page with Elliot's name at the top. Financial power of attorney. Durable guardianship clause. Consent for third-party asset management. Some had highlighted lines. Others had sticky notes with words like, just in case, and good to have on file. None were signed. But all were filled in. My name typed in every space meant for the subject. Elliot's name in every box marked responsible party. And at the bottom of the last page a line left blank. For my signature. Beside it, a note in his handwriting. No rush, Mom. We can go over these together when I visit next month. I stared at that line. The emptiness of it didn't feel neutral. It felt hungry. I didn't call him. Instead, I called Alice. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice, warm and familiar. I hadn't heard it in weeks. We didn't waste time on pleasantries. Just facts. Details. Page numbers. I read them aloud. She listened in silence. Then finally said, Claudia, this isn't just paperwork. This is a corridor. A corridor to what? I asked. To erasing your decision-making without ever using the word erase. We sat in silence. Even the line between us felt still. Then she asked if I had a scanner. I said yes. She told me to scan everything. Every page. Even the envelope. Document the paper trail before it becomes your only trail, she said. That night, I looked through my banking app. I hadn't used it in months. The interface had changed. It took me 3 tries to log in. Once inside, I found 5 small transfers. Each under $300. Each to a family expense account I didn't recognize. The notes read things like, summer trip prep, joint groceries, kids' needs. I hadn't approved any of them. But there they were processed, dated, cleared. I checked the mailing address on file. It had been updated. Not to this house. But to Elliot's. 3 weeks ago. No notification sent. I sat back. The screen lit my face in the dark kitchen. Outside, the wind picked up. Chimes rattled on the porch. But inside, it was still. Too still. I clicked, log out. Closed the laptop. Then pulled the curtain closed with both hands. Not to keep the world out. But to give myself a moment. A moment to feel what it means when trust becomes a transaction. 3 days passed before I opened the folder again. It had been sitting on the side table, next to my chair. I hadn't touched it. Not out of fear. But because I needed to be still long enough to understand what I was looking at. On the last page of the document stack, there was a line I'd missed before. Tiny print. Barely visible. By signing, subject acknowledges diminished capacity to manage independent affairs. It wasn't even bolded. Just there. Tucked between more words that sounded careful and sterile. I reread it 3 times. Diminished. Not declared. Not diagnosed. Just assumed. I folded the page over, like I could hide the phrase by creasing it. But the words stayed in my head. Diminished. The irony wasn't lost on me. I remembered every name in the poetry club I led back in '82. Still had Robert's library card number memorized. Still knew Eloise's shoe size, Maddie's food allergies, and the name of the street where Elliot lost his first tooth. But this single clause wanted to redefine me. Quietly. Neatly. Legally. That evening, I stepped outside for air. The sky was bruised with the last hints of daylight. I sat on the porch, binder in my lap. Watched the moths gather around the light. One fluttered close to my sleeve, then drifted off. They always looked frantic until they didn't. Until they gave up circling. Inside the house, the phone rang. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Elliot. Hey, Mom. Just wanted to check, did you get the documents? His voice was light, as if we were discussing gardening catalogs. I did, I said. Oh, good, he replied. No rush on those. I know it's a lot to take in. There was a pause. Then he added, it's just better to have everything in place before anything. Shifts. Shifts. Another word pretending to care. I didn't respond right away. Then I said, did you change the mailing address with the bank? He hesitated, then cleared his throat. Well, I just thought it'd be simpler. Fewer things for you to manage. I looked down at the binder. Still open on my lap. All in my handwriting. All still intact. I'm managing just fine, I said. Soft. Clear. Final. He was quiet. Then offered something about the weather in Atlanta. I let him talk. And when the call ended, I closed the binder. Snapped the latch. Set it gently on the table beside me. Not out of reach. Not out of sight. Just present. Waiting. And I thought to myself, if someone rewrites you in the footnotes, how do you make them read the title again? I left the house for the first time in a week. Alice had offered her guest room just a few nights, she said, for a change of air. I didn't argue. I packed a small bag. Mostly notebooks, a few clothes, my favorite tea tin. The drive was short, but I felt every turn in my spine. Her house sat off a quiet road, past the post office and a faded Baptist church. The porch light was already on when I pulled in. She met me at the door with a hug that lingered just a second too long. Not pity. Recognition. The guest room smelled of lavender and old paper. I set my bag down and looked around. There were bookshelves lined with case law, ethics, texts, and a few old novels with cracked spines. The bedspread was pale green, hand-stitched, with tiny floral details. On the nightstand, a lamp, a coaster, and a framed photo of Alice's dog from years ago. No empty space. No room left for someone else's story. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a slow breath. Outside, wind moved through the trees like someone trying not to wake the house. I tried to sleep. But my mind wasn't tired. Just unsettled. I stared at the ceiling for hours, counting the small lines in the plaster, the subtle rhythm of the house settling into night. At one point, I heard a branch scrape the window. And for a brief second, I imagined it was Robert. Coming back from the shed, arms full of firewood, cheeks red with cold. But it wasn't. It was nothing. Just wind. The next morning, I stood in Alice's kitchen while she made toast. I held my teacup with both hands. Not for warmth but for steadiness. The scent of bergamot reminded me I was still here. She didn't ask questions. Didn't say things like, I told you so. Just handed me the butter and said, spread it like you're painting. We ate in silence. Later, I sat at her kitchen table, leafing through one of my old journals. A page from 2 years ago caught my eye. The ink had faded slightly. The line slanted upward. I read the entry once. Then again. And for a moment, I couldn't remember writing it. Not the details. Not the words. Not the weather I had so carefully described. I stared at the page until the edges blurred. Then turned it over. My throat tightened. Not from tears. But from something more haunting. Doubt. I whispered it aloud to myself. Was this mine? The question landed like a pebble in deep water, small, but endless. The memory had always been mine. The mind, my anchor. But that moment, staring at handwriting I didn't recognize, I felt a crack form. Thin. Quiet. Real. I didn't cry. I just sat still, with the page flat beneath my fingers. And wondered. If you begin to doubt your own voice, what's left to silence? That evening, Alice had a dinner to attend. A retirement party for a colleague. She offered to stay, but I insisted she go. I'll be fine, I said, and I meant it. Or at least I wanted to. The house felt different without her in it. Quieter, but not in the peaceful way. I made myself a simple meal soup from a can, crackers, half an apple. I ate standing up at the kitchen counter. No music. No TV. Only the occasional creak from the hallway and the sound of the radiator ticking like a tired metronome. Afterward, I wandered the house. Not snooping. Just drifting. The living room had a shelf of framed photos: Alice in graduation robes, Alice holding a baby I didn't recognize, Alice and her sister in Maine. All labeled. All dated. All remembered. I stood there a long time, tracing each frame with my eyes. And suddenly I felt that small, sharp pang behind the ribs. Not jealousy. Something gentler. But heavier. Longing. I returned to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed. The binder I'd brought was tucked beneath the nightstand, wrapped in a cotton bag. I pulled it out, opened to the section labeled, Legacy. Inside, a typed letter I'd started months ago addressed to no one in particular. Just thoughts. Intentions. Should anything happen, it began, these are the things I hope remain. I reread it slowly. The sentences were careful, composed. But they felt distant now, like they were written by a version of me still certain she'd be heard. I closed the folder, set it beside me, and let the silence rise. It climbed the walls, hung from the ceiling, settled into my bones. For the first time in years, I felt small, not physically, existentially, like a figure fading from a photograph left in sunlight too long. I reached for my tea. It had gone cold. I took a sip anyway. Not for the taste, but for the ritual. Then, on impulse, I opened my phone. Scrolled through photos. Most were of flowers, books, sunrises. A few of the girls, years ago, drawing at the kitchen table. And then I stopped. One image. A photo Elliot had taken 2 Christmases back. I was in the background. Unposed. Unaware. Blurry. He had posted it online with the caption, "Family, minus a few." I stared at that line. Minus a few. I had been in the frame. But still counted out. A presence so casual it didn't register. I turned off the phone. Placed it face down on the table. And whispered something I hadn't allowed myself to before. What if they've already replaced me? The room didn't answer. But the question hung there. Unmoving. Undeniable. I climbed into bed fully dressed. Stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. And thought. When everything you've built no longer holds your name. Were you ever really part of it at all? The next morning, I woke early. Alice was still asleep. The house was quiet, not heavy, this time just slow, like a breath held between 2 thoughts. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and stepped outside. The porch boards were cool beneath my slippers. Mist clung to the ground like an old story that refused to lift. I stood there, holding a mug of warm tea, watching the fog move through the trees. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel erased. I felt still. And stillness, I remembered, is not absence. It's intention. Later that morning, Alice found me in the study. She brought toast and a file folder. I pulled these from an old case, she said, setting it down. Thought it might help. Inside, examples of contested power, of attorney filings, cases where elderly parents were ruled impaired, on hearsay alone. No diagnosis. Just pattern. Just paperwork. Just doubt. I flipped through the pages slowly. Each one a version of what could have happened to me. Might still. Alice said, most people don't notice it happening until it's done. I nodded. I think I noticed too soon, I said. She looked at me. That might be your greatest strength. After breakfast, I returned to the guest room. Sat on the bed. And opened my own folder. The letter I'd written weeks ago, the one beginning, "Should anything happen," felt inadequate now. Passive. Unspoken. I took out a fresh page. And began again. I am of sound mind, I wrote, the ink pressing slightly deeper into the paper than usual. This is not a plea, nor a justification. This is documentation. My story. My voice. I am not preparing for decline. I am preparing for clarity. My hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from weight. The weight of reclaiming. Not what had been taken, but what they were pretending was already gone. I wrote for nearly an hour. Lists. Memories. Patterns of behavior. Phone calls, word for word. I opened my email archive and printed every message from Elliot that referenced concerns, planning, or preparedness. I organized them by date. Punched holes. Filed them. It wasn't anger that moved me. It was precision. Not rage. Resolve. Each page I slid into place felt like a stitch pulled through torn fabric. Amending. Slow. But sure. When I finished, I placed the binder on my lap and sat quietly. Not triumphant. Not broken. Just rooted. And for the first time in weeks, I thought, maybe this isn't the end of the story. Maybe it's the part where the narrator picks up her pen. That afternoon, I asked Alice about her Aunt Ruth. I remembered her from a Thanksgiving years ago. Quiet woman. Wore brooches shaped like birds. Always brought sweet potatoes no one ate, but everyone thanked her for. She passed about 6 years ago, Alice said, pouring us more tea. She was living in assisted care by then. Did she choose that? I asked. Alice hesitated. Not really, she said softly. It was arranged. Arranged. Such a soft word for something so final. She never pushed back? I asked. She was too polite, Alice said. Didn't want to cause a fuss. Said it was easier for everyone. And was it? Alice didn't answer right away. Then she whispered. She died thinking she was a burden. We sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable silence, but the kind that holds a mirror. Later, I walked around Alice's garden. The rosemary bushes were overgrown. A birdbath tipped slightly to the left. But everything still bloomed. Even in neglect. Even in late spring's indecision. I thought of Ruth again. And suddenly, I saw the fork in the road ahead of me. One path was familiar. Polite. Acceptable. Silently agreed upon. A slow erasure, written in kind tones and official ink. The other? Not louder. Just firmer. Intentional. I picked a sprig of rosemary and pressed it between my fingers. Its oil stained the tips, released a sharp scent. Memory. I took it inside and tucked it into the spine of my binder. A living marker. A declaration. That night, I reread what I had written earlier that morning. The ink had dried. But the conviction hadn't. I added a line beneath the final paragraph. I refused to disappear politely. Then underlined it. Twice. Afterward, I found a photograph of myself taken in the old library before retirement. I was standing in front of the poetry shelf, one hand on Plath, the other on the date stamp. My face looked firm. Clear-eyed. I slipped the photo into the front sleeve of the binder. Not for vanity. For proof. That I had been precise once. That I still was. Before I went to bed, I turned off every light in the house. Except the one in the guest room. There, I left the binder open on the desk. Its pages splayed, as if breathing. Letting the night air settle between them. A quiet monument. To a woman who once indexed 1,000 stories. And was finally ready to author her own. The next morning, I visited the notary. A small office above the florist downtown. I had called ahead, said I needed a few things documented, no rush, I'd said. But I dressed with purpose. Pressed slacks. The pearl clip I hadn't worn since Robert's memorial. When I arrived, the woman behind the desk greeted me with a kind smile. Claudia Mercer? She asked. I nodded. She gestured to the small table by the window. I laid the binder down. Open to the page I had rewritten 3 times over. I'd like to make this part official, I said. She read it in silence. Didn't question it. Didn't look at me the way others had lately, tilted head, furrowed brow, that soft voice reserved for the uncertain. She simply handed me the pen. I signed slowly. Clearly. Each letter pressed into the paper like a quiet anchor. Then she stamped the page. The sound was satisfying. Definitive. Afterward, I stopped by the bookstore. Bought a new journal leather bound, heavier than the others. This one wasn't for recording what was happening to me. It was for writing what I chose to remember. I wrote my name on the inside cover. Full name. Middle initial. No abbreviations. Then I slipped the receipt into the front pocket, not because I might forget but because it mattered. Proof of presence. Of purchase. Of authorship. That evening, back in Alice's guest room, I placed both books on the desk. Binder on the left. Journal on the right. And in between them, a small note card that read, "This is where the narrative returns to me." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And that steadiness was more precious than any apology I might never receive. I sat by the window until the light softened. Watched a rabbit dart through the hedges. Watched the porch light flicker on. And in that hush, I thought of all the women who had been rewritten. Softened. Faded. Filed under best intentions. I would not be one of them. I would leave a trail that could not be smudged. And if no one else ever read it, I would. And I would know it was true. Because I wrote it while I still could. Because I remembered every word. Because it was mine. And no one had the right to speak it for me. Not while I still had breath. Not while ink still flowed. Not while I had a name. And a pen. And a reason to use it. I didn't tell Elliot I was back home. Let him assume I was still at Alice's, sipping tea, letting time blur. Let him feel ahead of me. It made the silence easier to work in. And I needed silence now like a canvas needs stillness before the brush. The first morning back, I opened the front door just wide enough to let the mountain air roll in. It carried pine, damp stone, and something else. Resolve. I sat at the kitchen table, where the morning sun still reached across the wood in angled gold. And I began to sort. Every document I owned, real ones, not digital copies. Not PDFs. Not text threads. Ink on paper. The kind that can't be updated with a password or erased with one tap. The kind that breathes slightly when you hold it to the light. Birth certificate. Marriage license. Deed to the house, last updated in 2001. The original will Robert and I had signed over the toaster oven, after Maddie was born. My health care directive. Still valid. Still mine. I placed each in a fireproof lockbox I hadn't opened in years. The latch clicked shut like a spine locking into place. Then I made tea Earl Grey with milk. Sat down. Opened my notebook. And drew 3 columns. Column 1, what I own. Column 2, what I choose to give. Column 3, what I no longer owe anyone. I paused a moment at that third one. Then wrote the word, explanation. And underlined it. Twice. That afternoon, I called Miss Darlene Wexley. Our family lawyer. We hadn't spoken since Robert passed, but her voice hadn't aged a bit. Claudia Mercer, she said. Still in the hills? Still filing things alphabetically, I replied. We scheduled a meeting for Thursday morning. She didn't ask why. Didn't press. Just said, bring whatever you've got, we'll make it work. After I hung up, I went to the back closet. Pulled out a blue folder I hadn't touched since Robert's diagnosis. Inside, outlines for an educational fund we had once dreamed up. A scholarship for first-generation library science students in North Carolina. He had scribbled in the margins, let them inherit books, not burden. I traced the handwriting with my thumb. He'd used a green pen, the kind I always told him smudged too easily. The ink had bled just enough to feel human. That night, I sat down at the dining room table. Lit a candle not for light, but to remind myself this moment was intentional. Not an accident. Not a reaction. A beginning. I placed the blue folder beside me. Opened my current binder. And in careful, deliberate script, I wrote. This amendment reflects the full and sole intent of Claudia Ruth Mercer. Effective immediately. Then I signed my name. Full name. Middle initial. No abbreviations. The candle flickered once. Then stilled. And I whispered aloud. To archive is to remember. To amend is to claim. And I had just done both. Thursday morning came with a thin fog over the valley. I left early, binder in hand, blue folder tucked beneath it. I wore my navy coat and the scarf Eloise had once finger-knitted for me, back when her hands were still small and her affections uncomplicated. Downtown Asheville was just waking up. Shops still shuttered. The bakery smelled of butter and yeast. I passed it, tempted for a moment to go in. But my appointment came first. Darlene's office was on the second floor of an old brick building with ivy curling around the windows. Inside, the walls were lined with books, most untouched. A desk with too many pens. Photos of grandkids and diplomas. She greeted me with a hug that was brief but real. I cleared the hour, she said, gesturing to the chair across from hers. Let's begin. I opened the binder first. Walked her through everything page by page. Chronological. Logical. No room for interpretation. Then I set down the blue folder. She skimmed the proposal, eyebrows rising slightly. You want to redirect a portion of your estate into this? Yes. And exclude direct inheritance? Yes. She looked at me, not in surprise, but in respect. That's a very loud choice, made very quietly, she said. I nodded. She adjusted her glasses. We'll need to file an amendment to your existing will. I already drafted the language, I replied. I handed her a typed sheet. She read it slowly, lips moving just slightly. Her head tilted, considering. This is solid, she said. Clean. Intentional. And she looked up completely within your rights. Even if someone contests? Especially if someone contests. She tapped the edge of the paper. This is what we call a preemptive anchor. You're planting your flag before the storm arrives. We spent the next hour signing, stamping, certifying. Each seal like a stone laid into a path no one could move. At the end, Darlene folded the documents into a thick envelope and handed it to me. You've just made a map, she said. I took it with both hands. It's not revenge, I whispered. It's remembrance. She smiled. There's a difference. Outside, the fog had lifted. The air smelled like rain that never quite arrived. I walked slowly to the car. Not out of weariness, but out of reverence. These were the first steps of something I didn't yet name. Not power. Not closure. Something quieter. More enduring. I placed the envelope on the passenger seat. Buckled it in. And said aloud to no one. You don't have to raise your voice to raise your boundary. That weekend, I cleaned the house with deliberate care. Not for guests. For clarity. I polished the table where I once taught Elliot his cursive. Dusted the bookshelf alphabetized by genre. Then sentiment. I wiped each picture frame, even the ones that no longer held my face. Then I set the tableau with plates, but with paper. Each chair had a manila envelope. Unsealed. Visible. No mystery. Inside, a copy of my will amendment. Proof of my choice. Not a threat. A record. The folder from Darlene sat at the head of the table. Beside it, a handwritten card, for reference. Not for discussion. I wasn't trying to provoke. I was simply refusing to vanish. Sunday morning, I texted Elliot. Lunch here. Just you and Cora. I have updates. No explanation. No warmth. Just enough. He replied within minutes. Okay. Just us? Yes, I typed. Nothing formal. Of course, he answered. I reread that message 3 times. Of course. As if anything about us had been formal lately except the ways they tried to quietly manage me. I spent the next hour assembling the last piece. Not a speech. A timeline. Typed. Simple. 1 column, date. 2nd column, event. 3rd, my recollection. Every call he'd made referencing my confusion. Every form mailed without discussion. Every digital transaction rerouted. Each entry ended with a single word. Notified? No. I printed it on cream paper. Tucked it into my own envelope. Marked it, Mother's memory. Unofficial, but unshaken. That afternoon, I brewed Earl Grey. set out 2 chairs. The third mine was already pulled back, as if I'd been sitting in it forever. I lit the candle Robert had gifted me our last Christmas together. It smelled of pine and black tea. Strong, but soft. I stood a moment in the doorway, surveying the room. Not to check. To witness. Everything was ready. Not rehearsed. But resolved. At 12:04, I heard tires on gravel. I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I simply straightened the edge of the timeline printout. Let my hand rest on the paper, like punctuation. Final. Intentional. When they knocked, I opened the door myself. I didn't say, "Welcome." Didn't hug. Just stepped aside and let the silence speak first. Inside, the air was still. But something had shifted. And I could feel it. This time, the story would not belong to the loudest voice in the room. It would belong to the clearest. They arrived just past noon. Elliot first, then Cora, a few steps behind, holding a store-bought pie wrapped in foil. "Hi, Mom," he said, offering a careful smile. "Smells like bergamot?" I nodded once. Gestured toward the table. Everything was already in place. No meal. No napkins. Just envelopes. Stacked with calm precision. He paused. Glanced at Cora, who gave him a brief, polite shrug. Then they sat. I waited until they settled. Poured each of us tea. Set the kettle back on the trivet with a quiet clink. Then I spoke. "I've made a few updates." Cora reached for her envelope automatically. But Elliot hesitated. He picked his up more slowly, eyes scanning the room like it might explain something. Inside, my amended will. My redirection of assets. My revocation of any previous implied authority. He flipped through the pages once. Then again. And said nothing. Cora, to her credit, read every word. Then folded the papers neatly and placed them back inside the envelope. "Mom," Elliot began, voice steady but stretched. "You could have talked to me about this." I looked at him. Direct. Unflinching. "I did," I said. "Over time. Through pauses. Through corrections, you dismissed." He blinked. "I just thought we were planning ahead." I reached beneath the table. Pulled out the timeline. Set it down between us. He glanced at it, then frowned. "What is this?" I tapped the column labeled. Notified? No. Line after line. Call after call. Transaction after transaction. Quiet actions with loud consequences. Cora leaned forward. Her brow furrowed. "Did you really change the mailing address?" Elliot's jaw tightened. "I meant to change it back," he muttered. "It was temporary." "No," I said, voice low, clear. "It was strategic." A pause. A long one. Elliot leaned back in his chair. The sun coming through the window outlined the strain in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. Not like this. Not so still. Not so documented. "I thought you'd be grateful," he said. "We were trying to protect you." "From what?" I asked. I let the question settle between us like dust. Then, slowly, I reached for the final paper. Unfolded it. And read aloud. "I am not forgetful, I am remembering quietly the parts they want erased." Elliot didn't speak. Neither did Cora. The only sound was the creak of the chair as I leaned back slightly. Letting the silence hold. Letting the weight shift. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't accused. I had simply remembered. Accurately. Out loud. I stood up. Not abruptly. Just enough to shift the weight of the room. I walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a small black box. Inside were the old cassette tapes. Recordings from years past. My voice reading poems to Eloise when she couldn't fall asleep. Robert's laugh in the background. The girls singing "You Are My Sunshine" into the kitchen microphone. I held the box in my hands for a moment. Then placed it gently in the center of the table. Elliot looked at it but said nothing. Cora reached toward it, then stopped halfway. "They forgot this version of me," I said softly. But I didn't. I sat back down, placed my hands flat on the table. I remember the mother who stayed up until 3 helping you write your 8th grade speech, I said, eyes on Elliot. You don't. And that's okay. I remember the woman who held this family together through layoffs and hospital nights and birthday cakes that sank in the middle. You forgot her. That's okay, too. But what isn't okay? I paused. Let the silence open. Let it breathe. Is trying to bury her before she's gone. The wind outside picked up. A loose corner of the folder fluttered once, then stilled. No one reached for it. I didn't need them to. I had already put everything on the table. Elliot cleared his throat. Twice. But no words came. I could see him trying to assemble something from what was left. But some silences don't need to be filled. They need to be faced. Cora finally spoke. We didn't know, she whispered. I nodded once. That, I said, was your choice. I stood again. This time, with finality. Gathered the envelopes one by one. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just done. I placed each into a canvas satchel by the door. Left one copy on the table. Unfolded. Unhidden. Keep this, I said. Elliot looked at me then. Truly looked. The boy who used to cling to my hip when thunder rolled. The man who had learned to file forms faster than he learned to ask questions. He looked at me like he finally remembered I had a mind. And a voice. And that I had used both. I stepped toward the hallway, then turned back. My dignity, I said quietly, was never up for inheritance. Then I left the room. Not because I was finished. But because they needed to sit with what remained. And silence, this time, would belong to them. The house had grown quieter in the weeks since. Not empty. Just quieter. Even the clock in the hallway seemed to tick with more respect now. No one called to ask about the insurance papers. No unexpected envelopes arrived. And for the first time in months, the silence wasn't suspicious. It was spacious. I filled it slowly. Carefully. I reorganized the bookshelf. Alphabetically by author, then again by year of impact. Steinbeck beside Morrison. Plath beside Whitman. All of them within reach. I brought the black cassette box out from its hiding place and set it by the window. Every few days, I played one. Sometimes, just to hear my own voice. Sometimes to remember how small Eloise once sounded. How Robert used to hum when he didn't know I was recording. How we all used to exist in one place. In the same breath. I didn't cry. I smiled, mostly. The kind of smile that starts in the chest, not the face. On Tuesday mornings, I started going back to the library. Not to volunteer. Just to sit. To exist among spines and dates and the quiet rhythm of someone else flipping pages. The new librarian, a kind-eyed woman named Marcy, nodded at me the first week. By the third, she had set aside a chair by the poetry shelves. By the fifth, she asked if I'd ever considered leading a memory writing circle for women over 60. I told her I'd think about it. That night, I did more than think. I drafted a flyer. Every voice remembers, it read. Beneath it, a quiet writing space for women who carry too much story and not enough space. I printed 6 copies. Pinned one to the board by the town pharmacy. Another on the door of the laundromat. The others I mailed to women I'd once taught beside, laughed beside. Outlasted in the staff lounge during storms and staff meetings. The next Sunday, I found a letter waiting for me. Plain envelope. No return address. Inside, a handwritten thank you note. The ink a little shaky. The name unfamiliar. But the word so familiar, it ached. I didn't know I needed to write until someone gave me permission. Thank you for remembering what remembering means. I placed it in my new journal. Page 1. Below it, I wrote. Legacy is not what we leave behind. It's what we insist on keeping while we're still here. That evening, I brewed a cup of lavender tea. Poured it into the chipped mug with Sylvia Plath's quote still etched into the glaze. Let me live, love, and say it well in good sentences. The scent drifted through the kitchen. Soft. Clean. Certain. Outside, the sun dipped just behind the ridge. its final light pooling on the floorboards. I let it touch the toes of my slippers. Then reached for my pen, turned the page, and began a new entry. Not about loss. Not about defense. Just today. And how good it felt to be written by my own hand. It rained on the morning I received the grant confirmation. A soft, unhurried rain. The kind that makes everything smell like new leaves and old soil. The kind Robert used to say made the pines sing. I sat by the window, binder open, glasses resting low on my nose. The letter was short, formal, but the last sentence made me close my eyes for a moment. We are honored to carry forward the Mercer Legacy Fund for rural library students. Your voice will help others find theirs. I let the paper rest against my chest for a while. Then folded it. Not with ceremony, but with care. After lunch, I took out the small wooden box from the top shelf of the pantry. Inside, letters I'd never sent. Mostly to Robert. Some to myself. One to Eloise, written the night she graduated kindergarten. I burned none of them. I read each aloud, quietly. Then tied them back together with the faded green ribbon from our wedding bouquet. Not everything needed to be passed on. Some memories were just meant to be kept warm. I placed the box back where it had been. Still mine. Still untouched by signatures or suspicion. That evening, the wind brought a chill. I pulled the shawl tighter around my shoulders. Lit a single candle. And wrote in my journal for over an hour. No agenda. No intention of legacy. Just thoughts, turning gently like pages in soft light. At some point, I paused. Listened. Beyond the walls, I heard nothing but the small creaks of a house remembering how to hold a person again. That kind of quiet, the forgiving kind, had taken months to return. But it had come. And I had earned it. I stood, stretched, and placed the pen down. Walked to the front door. Stepped out barefoot onto the porch, letting the wood press cool and solid beneath me. The rain had stopped. The sky had not yet cleared. But that was all right. I was no longer waiting for skies to clear. I was learning to live inside the weather. I whispered Robert's name once, not expecting a reply. Only acknowledgement. Then I whispered my own. Claudia. Just to hear it land softly in the air. It did. And it stayed. Tomorrow, I'd return to the library. The writing circle had grown. 7 women now. 2 bring cookies. 1 always arrives early just to sit near the window. We write about things no one else saw. But that doesn't make them less true. It makes them ours. Before bed, I checked the envelope drawer. Still full. Still ready. I didn't know who might need one next. But I knew this. No one would ever again be told they forgot something they carried with both hands their entire life. Not while I was here. Not while I still wrote. Not while my name still held. Not while my breath still reached the page. The softest justice is the kind that lets us rest in our own truth. What does dignity mean to you? In this season of your life. Share a piece of your voice below. Someone out there may be waiting to hear they're not alone. You are welcome here. You are remembered. Subscribe to Kamar FM, where every story is a second chance.